Democratic presidential candidate and environmental lawyer Robert F. Kennedy Jr. appeared on the Des Moines Register soapbox stage at the Iowa State Fair Saturday. While on stage, he brought up memories of his father and uncle. He also called out concerns about the environmental impact of pipelines in Iowa.
And this is a classic boondoggle by which these big shots, BlackRock, Vanguard, Smithfield, and which is also partners on one of these projects, are getting control of their land. They're turning us into a colonial model, and they are strip mining the wealth and the equity from the American public. When I get in the White House, I will put an end to this, and this pipeline will never be built.
Backstage, Forbes asked Kennedy if he would consider a place in a Republican administration. Here's what he said.
I'm not going to. I've been repeatedly asked whether I'd consider being Donald Trump's vice presidential pick, and I would not.
But in any GOP administration, would you serve cabinet, anything like that?
I don't know. I don't know.
At the end of last month, Kennedy was denied Secret Service protection. In a tweet, he had mentioned that since his father's assassination in 1968, candidates for president have been offered Secret Service protection except for him. At the fair, Kennedy mentioned it again, saying,
I'm not going to tell you my security arrangements for obvious reasons, but as far as we can tell, I'm the first candidate in history to be denied Secret Service protection on request. My uncle got Secret Service protection. Teddy got Secret Service protection 441 days out, and he wasn't even running. So President Carter, who he was running against, it was a great personal antipathy between them. And nevertheless, he provided him Secret Service protection. John McCain got it 551 days out. Obama got it 551 days out. Literally, Jesse Jackson, Shirley Chisholm, you go all the way back, John McCain. All of them were given Secret Service protection much farther out than I requested. The excuse that the White House has given that it's not available until 120 days out is just specious, it's dishonest, it's not true.
He went on to critique Joe Biden's approach to the Russia-Ukraine war.
Mr. Kennedy, you're running to unseat a Democrat. You're running as a Democrat. My question to you is, what's your biggest issue with President Biden's leadership?
The censorship, the war, and putting neocons, war-mongering neocons in front of in charge of our foreign policy, and putting Wall Street in charge of our domestic policy and our economy.
So what would you do differently?
I would do everything differently. I would negotiate with the Russians, which is what they've wanted to do from day one. The Russians signed a peace agreement in March of 2022, which we just found out about, and Zelensky initialed it. And the Russians were actually withdrawing their troops in March of 2022 and April of 2022. And President Biden sent Boris Johnson to Kiev to blow up that agreement. And since then, 135,000 kids, Ukrainian kids, have died, and 50,000 Russian kids. My son went over to Ukraine and fought in the Kharkiv offensive. He was a machine gunner in a special forces unit. And so, I'm deeply concerned with the welfare of the people in Ukraine. I admire their valor. They died unnecessarily to fulfill an ambition of the United States, which was to use Ukraine in a proxy war with Russia. In fact, when President Biden was asked about what the purpose of the war was, he said regime change in Russia. When Lloyd Austin, his Secretary of Defense, was asked in April 2022, right after they blew up the agreement, why are we in Ukraine? He said to exhaust the Russian army and degrade its capacity to fight anywhere else in the world. That is not about Ukrainian freedom. It is about using Ukraine in a proxy war, in a geopolitical dispute between two great powers.
Are you saying that it's the United States' fault that Russia invaded Ukraine?
No, I'm not. I'm not making any excuse for Vladimir Putin. His invasion was illegal, it was brutal, and he had other options. But did we deliberately provoke the action? Yes, we did. Again and again and again, we would not allow Zelensky to sign the Minsk Accords in 2019. Zelensky ran as the peace candidate. He's a comedian. He's an actor, which I'm not disparaging because that's what my wife does. But he had never been in politics. But he won with 70% of the vote. Why? Because he ran promising that he would sign the Minsk Accords, which were already agreed to by Russia, by France, and by Germany. And then the United States, our White House, went over there and we would not let him sign. If we had let him sign, this war would have never happened and all those kids would be alive today.
The DNC will not be hosting a debate for the handful of Democratic candidates going against incumbent Joe Biden. Kennedy emphasized that the candidates should be picked by the people and not by the party.
You know, like I said, I think we're living in a period of our history, and it's really important to convince the American public that the system is not rigged against them, that we have a real democracy in our country. And part of having a democracy is that the public actually, the rank and file of the Democratic Party, the public gets to pick the candidate. It's not picked by the party like they do in the Soviet, or they did in the Soviet Union. It should be picked by the people. And they're not, the best way to pick them is to have debates, to have town halls, to do retail politics, to come out to places like this, to face the press, to face the public. Because otherwise, we have politicians who are living inside of a bubble. And the only people they're talking to are the billionaires who are writing them checks. And we need people. I see what's happening in the American heartland. And I see the desperation, the mental illness, that we've never seen anything like this before, the epidemics of opioids firsthand. The epidemics of alcoholism, of depression, of drug abuse, of the use of, the absolute use of SSRIs, and the debt, this extraordinary debt that Americans are being crushed by. And if you're not actually talking to people, going to kitchen tables, and talking to them, it's very easy for politicians to sit in a big mansion in Washington, D.C. and forget about the rest of the country. And I don't think that's good for our democracy.
Presidential hopefuls will continue to make an appearance at the Iowa State Fair through August 20.